Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be talking about what happens after death and the afterlife. Now, to start, I want to share a little bit about how I grew up believing in the afterlife, and then what caused me to change my mind about that, and then ultimately how I view and understand the afterlife today. So, growing up in church, I believed that there was a literal place in the afterlife called heaven and a literal place in the afterlife called hell. And heaven was a place of peace and joy and bliss and love, and there was no pain, no suffering, no death, and it's where people would spend eternity worshiping Jesus. But on the other hand, hell was a place of eternal conscious torment. It was a place where sinners and unbelievers would go to be punished forever. And once they were there, there was no chance for repentance. There was no way to escape this eternal punishment. And that's what I believed because that's what I was taught. But when I was in college, I started to question and doubt a lot of these different doctrines I was taught growing up in church. And one of the first ones was this doctrine of hell, this notion of eternal punishment. And at the time, I'm a Christian, I'm studying to get my bachelor's degree in theology, and so I approached this from a biblical perspective. I said, okay, I'm going to do my own research. I'm going to really learn how to study and think for myself. And if the Bible really does teach this notion of hell, then I'll believe in it. But at least I can say that I form my beliefs based upon me doing my own honest, independent research. And so I did. And the first thing I discovered about this was that one of the things I was taught growing up was that the Bible is crystal clear about the afterlife and heaven and hell, and it's consistent about that teaching. And the first thing I discovered was that that is not true because the Bible is not a univocal book. What does univocal mean? Univocal means one voice, one message. And so the Bible from Genesis to Revelation does not speak with one voice. It does not speak consistently through. Why? Because the Bible is not a book. It's a library of books written by 40 different authors with different influences and cultures and backgrounds. And there's so many factors that went into them writing the scriptures. And that has to be understood. We have to understand context and we have to know how to properly exegete the text before we start trying to form these different doctrines and belief structures. And so what I found was that in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, which makes up nearly 70% of the Christian Bible, there is no notion of the afterlife like we believe in modern Christianity today with this dualistic heaven and hell. Because from the Jewish perspective, in the Jewish tradition, the afterlife consisted of this place called Sheol, and it's where everyone went, the righteous and the unrighteous. And we read about this in the Old Testament. And so everyone would go to Sheol, and then from there, the righteous would eventually move away from there and maybe even resurrect, but the unrighteous would just cease to exist. They would perish. There was no eternal punishment. There was no version of hell like we have today in modern Christianity. Now, in the New Testament, we see different ideas and different perspectives on the afterlife. And so, again, it's not consistent. But even with that, I've heard so many people used to say, oh, Jesus taught more about hell than anyone in the Bible. And so the word that Jesus uses for hell in the Greek is Gehenna, and Gehenna has nothing to do with this afterlife place of punishment or eternal punishment at all. Gehenna was a literal place on earth outside of Jerusalem. It was a valley outside of the city. And I made a video on hell and why I changed my mind about hell, and I'll put that link to the video in the description below, because if you haven't seen it, I highly encourage you to go back and watch it. I really unpack why I changed my mind about it from a biblical perspective, from an early church perspective, and then from just a personal perspective, because one of the things that I learned was that what we believe about hell and the afterlife has a direct connection to what we believe most about God. And so it is very important for us to really know what we believe about the afterlife, what we believe about eternal punishment, and all these different things, and why we believe what we believe. And so again, if you haven't seen that video, I don't want to spend too much time talking about hell and in heaven in this particular video, because I want to move past that and talk about how I view the afterlife now and why I view it that way today. But yeah, that video will be below. So I got to a place where I said, okay, like there is no notion of eternal conscious torment in the Bible like I was taught. And again, there is no consistent message of what the afterlife is even like. And, you know, the Bible really doesn't have a lot to say about the afterlife. And then I started doing some studying on heaven, because once I decided that I don't believe in hell anymore, well, then the next question was, well, what about heaven? Is there still a heaven? And what does that look like? And I went straight to the Gospels. I went to Jesus, because Jesus talks a little bit about heaven. But what I found interesting was that when Jesus would talk about heaven, he didn't really make it out to be this place that was distant and far off and in the afterlife. When Jesus talked about heaven, he talked about heaven as this reality that was possible for us to experience right here, right now, on the earth and within us. And so for Jesus, I think whatever heaven is, heaven was much more of a state of consciousness for him. And we find this a lot also in the Gospel of Thomas. He talks about the kingdom of heaven is within you and outside of you, all around you, and it's spread all over the earth, but people just can't see it. So what does that tell me? That tells me that it's that Jesus's understanding of whatever heaven is was much more of a state of consciousness that we can tap into and experience right here, right now, by going within, and not so much a far off, distant place up there somewhere where some people get to go after they die. And so after that, I was like, okay, now I don't know what to believe about the afterlife, because whatever the afterlife is, it's not what I used to think it was with this dualistic heaven and hell. So where do I go from here? And this is when I started looking into near-death experiences. And there have been tens of thousands of reports about near-death experiences, maybe more than that. And so I started looking into some of these reports. I started reading some and listening to some online. And I was really fascinated, because although each experience was a little bit different, there were many consistencies and similarities in these experiences. And, you know, when I was growing up in church and fundamentalist religion, I used to hear about some of these near-death experiences every now and then from people who weren't Christian, people who were a part of other religions, or people who just were atheists. And when I would hear these experiences, and I would hear that during their near-death experience, they encountered their God or the religious figure that they were worshiping on earth. Or when I would hear reports of atheists who would have a near-death experience, who would encounter this unconditional love, and they were transformed by this love. And then they came back and they started sharing a message of love. And when I would hear stuff like that, that troubled me, because why? These stories, these experiences that other people were having went against my belief structure of what I believed about heaven and hell. And so I would ask my different spiritual leaders and pastors about these experiences that other people were having. And they would always say, well, we got to be really careful, because if you hear about a near-death experience, or any experience for that matter, that does not match the Bible, and when they said that, they meant their interpretation of the Bible, we have to be very careful, and we need to just make sure that that person wasn't just making it up, or, you know, maybe they were deceived, or maybe they misinterpreted the experience, all these different things. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, okay, really? Like that's the answer? And for me, that wasn't good enough. That didn't explain why so many people, again, tens of thousands of people, were having near-death experiences. And in these experiences, they were experiencing nothing like I was taught about what the afterlife is like. And so I said, you know what? I think it's more reliable. I think it's probably better to start really studying and listening to these near-death experiences and allowing the consistencies and similarities in these stories to potentially frame what I believe about the afterlife, instead of listening to a pastor or a priest tell me about his interpretation of the Bible and what he thinks the afterlife is like. And so I decided to do that. And after doing that for a few years, I noticed these consistencies, and I have a list that I'm going to read. The first one is, and this was probably the most common among all these different reports. The first one that people report is that when they make that shift. Now, let me just say this before I get into these different consistencies. So, who we really are, our deepest essence is pure consciousness, infinite consciousness. And what happens is that when we incarnate, when we take on a physical form in this earth plane, in this earth realm, infinite consciousness localizes itself in a finite mind. And in that finite mind, we experience the earth and this world through our five senses, through the vehicle of the body. And so you could say that we are in the body, but I think maybe potentially a better way of saying it is that the body is in us, in consciousness. The body and even the finite mind is something that is arising in consciousness, in infinite consciousness. And so are we leaving the body, or is the body leaving us? You know, I think it doesn't really matter how you say it, but I think just for you to have a perspective of what's happening during that shift from having the experience of consciousness localized in a finite mind in a body, going from moving into the other side, what's happening is that consciousness is no longer localizing in that finite mind, in that earth body, and it's moving on to a different plane, a different realm. And so the first thing that people report is, most of the time, is that they experience no judgment. And this is a shock for a lot of people, especially people that grew up in some kind of fundamentalist religion. Why? Because they're expecting judgment. They're expecting to see a deity on a throne who is ready to judge them as soon as they pass on to the other side. But to their surprise, there is no judgment. There is just pure, unconditional love. And they say that this unconditional love is beyond words, it's beyond thought. But it's this presence that they say that when they encounter this presence, they know deep within their being that they are home. And it is a very profound experience. But that's one of the most common reports that people have when they cross over. They immediately encounter this immense, profound presence of pure, unconditional love. No judgment, just pure, unconditional love. The second thing is we know that here on earth, in this earth plane, that when we have a thought, our thoughts create our reality. Our thoughts turn into words, and words turn into the manifestation of physical form. But here on earth, that can happen over time. There's a process with that, and it's not always instant. It's not always automatic. And we know that. We're learning about that. I teach a little bit about that. And people are experiencing their outer world, reflecting their inner world by practicing meditation and getting into these deeper meditative states where they are rewiring their subconscious programming, their subconscious minds, what they mostly believe and think, and then as a result, what they believe and think is being manifested in their outer world. Okay, so we know that here on earth, but on the other side, they say that that process is automatic. As soon as you think of something, it materializes, it appears. And so what happens is, I think, they also say during the near-death experience, there's different stages to it. And so in the early stages, what tends to happen, either right before or right after that immediate initial presence of unconditional love, is that what the person is thinking or feeling or what they believe subconsciously starts to manifest in what they think is their external experience during their time in this is the astral plane that they're in, or that's what people will say, that there's the astral plane is the other side, and then there's higher planes above that. And I don't want to get too much into what's beyond that today, but while they're in the astral plane, they start to see their deepest beliefs manifest. And so a lot of times this is why people will encounter the deity or the religious figure they were worshiping on earth in front of them, and they can communicate with them. Or maybe what they believed about heaven is what they experience and see at first. And here's the thing, a lot of times what someone may have believed about heaven, for the most part, could be what life is really like on the other side, in the astral plane. But sometimes it's not exactly. And so what tends to happen is that the longer the person is on the other side, then eventually their subconscious beliefs and feelings and thoughts that are manifesting in front of them start to kind of fade away. They start to dissipate, and then they start to experience that unconditional love behind all that, which is what the other side is really all about. But initially, it's a lot of their subconscious being projected and being reflected in what they think is their external experience. And so I think that's what's happening a lot of times. People have asked me, well, how about when people have a near-death experience and they experience hell or some kind of like nightmarish experience? And, it's very similar to if let's say you've got some fear, some anxiety, and it's really strong and it's deep, it's subconscious. What happens with these feelings and emotions that we have? Well, when we dream at night, those feelings that we have, those deep beliefs, manifest into a movie, into a dream that appears to be some kind of external world, some kind of external experience that we're in. And when we're dreaming, we don't know. We can't tell the difference. We don't know that we're dreaming unless we're lucid dreaming. But what is a dream? A dream is a reflection, it's a projection of our deepest subconscious beliefs. So it's very similar on the other side at first, and especially because what we're thinking and believing is automatically manifesting, literally manifesting in our experience. It makes us really convinced that this is what it's like when we have it, or when someone has an experience like that. But again, as they stay there long enough, all that starts to kind of fade away. And as they change, as they accept the peace and the joy and the unconditional love on the inside, then that starts to reflect on their external experience. So the other thing is people report that when they are on the other side, they are experiencing everything, not through their five senses, because they're not in their earth body anymore. They are now experiencing everything through an astral body. And so that's another thing. There's different bodies. There's the earth body, the astral body, the causal body that's beyond the astral body. And again, I don't want to get into that too much today. I will say that in the book Autobiography of a Yogi, written by Paramahansa Yogananda, chapter 43 is called The Resurrection of Sri Yukteswar. And Sri Yukteswar was Yogananda's guru. And after Sri Yukteswar passed away, he came back, he resurrected and visited Yogananda and explained to him what the afterlife was like. So I highly encourage you to read that book and to read that chapter, because there's some really interesting teachings on the afterlife, the astral plane, the causal plane, and these different bodies that we have and what that really looks like. Anyways, what people report is that when they are experiencing the other side, it's not through their five senses, it's through the sixth sense, which is intuition, because the astral body is different than this earth body that we have. And what we're experiencing through this sixth sense is like an expansion of consciousness. So it's hard to explain, it's hard to describe, but it's basically like consciousness here is localized, and we can feel very limited here. But on the other side, when there's that expansion of consciousness in the astral body, it's almost like you can see all around you, like you can see behind you, and you're not seeing with your eyes, you're seeing with this sixth sense. And that's what people report during their experience of the other side. And I find that really amazing. The other thing is that there's no time. So what they say is that here on earth, we've got this mental construct of linear time, right? But on the other side, there is no time. It's eternity. And eternity is not a time that starts, that goes on forever and ever and ever. Eternity is beyond time. It's no time. It's timelessness. And so on the other side, there is no linear time. There is no past, present, and future. And so people talk about being able to look at many past lives kind of all at the same time, or there is no time, but they're not viewing the past in a linear way. Everything's happening at once because it's eternity, and eternity is outside of this realm of time. Time as we know it is a mental construct that we have here on earth. It's useful. We need it to live here on earth. But I also think that we're not supposed to be living in our headspace all the time. We're not supposed to be living in our minds all the time. We need to spend some time in our heart space through meditation. And as we go within, through meditation, as we get into the heart space, we can access and experience the eternal now, the present moment. Because in reality, that's all there is. That is ultimate reality, the eternal now, this one moment. And that can be totally experienced here on this earth through meditation when we get into our heart space. So I find that very interesting, and it's fascinating. So the next one is the next consistency, and this one's really cool. People report that as soon as they get to the other side, they meet some kind of being or some kind of guide or some kind of angel to walk them through their experience. And a lot of times this being is teaching them things about what the other side is like, and the other planes that go beyond the astral plane, and then beyond that, and how everything works, how reincarnation works, how past lives work, different assignments about if the person decides to go back to the earth. There's some teaching, there's some advice, some encouragement on how to handle certain situations. And the other thing too, people report, is also encountering loved ones that have passed away, friends, family members, or even maybe a relative that passed away and they never got to meet them here on earth. They encountered them on the other side, and I think that's really beautiful and amazing how that happens. But that's one of the more common reports. And then the last one I have is people report having a life review. And during this life review, normally they're viewing their life, and the guide, the being, is next to them, and I guess the being is walking them through their life review. But what they say a lot of times during this life review is that they are experiencing their life, their past, the life that they had just left, from the viewpoint, from the perspective of other people, so they can really see and understand what it was like from the perspective of others. And I find that very interesting. But what they say is that viewing their life from the perspective of others, so family members or friends that they were closest to, really gives them a deep understanding of the things that they did or didn't do, how they responded, how they reacted. So it's really a very important a very important learning experience. That's what the life review is. And, I think that the interesting thing, I think a great takeaway, at least for me, when I hear about many of these life reviews, is that, many of these near-death experiences, is that what people say is that during their near-death experience, they always come away with some profound teaching or some profound lesson. And so when they return to their bodies, when they return to this earth plane, something is immensely transformed within them, and they see themselves, others, the world, and God completely different. That's another thing people say. They say that before their NDE, they have one perspective of what God is like, and typically, if they believe in God, it's this deity, this being that's sitting on a throne. But when they have their near-death experience and they come back from it, what they say is that God is not like that at all. God is not a being, but being itself, infinite being or pure consciousness. And God is not something distant or separate from us, but we are all one and interconnected in God. And it's like the waves, the different waves of the ocean. There's uniqueness in each wave, but the waves are not separate. The waves are one. They're all part of the ocean. And so we are all divine. We are all part of this one infinite consciousness. And there's different vibrations and frequencies in this one consciousness or energy, but ultimately it's who we are. We are divine. And so God is not a being, but being itself. And we all share in that one being. That's the takeaway. And that has a tremendous impact, I think, on how people view others when they come back. Because now they're not viewing people as separate entities. They're seeing the underlying interconnectedness of everyone and everything. And that is really transforming how they treat other people and how they love and how they show compassion and kindness. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. And so with all these different consistencies and similarities, this is what I'll say. I've never had a near-death experience, so I can't tell you exactly what it's like, but something about these consistencies just really resonates with me. And you know what? There's probably many, many more than the list that I just read, that I talked about today. But for me, these are some of the main ones. And these consistencies are not just consistencies that I've discovered. Many other people have discovered these same consistencies. And there's been many people who have listened to thousands of other near-death experiences and many more than I have. And yet they still come away with these main consistencies. And so I think the ultimate takeaway is that especially with the life review, when people come back and they have their life review and they have this great experience, the main thing most of the time that they say is that we come here, we incarnate on this planet for a specific purpose and reason. And of course, for each being, there's going to be specific lessons to learn. But then there's like this ultimate lesson that comes with just being on this planet. And the ultimate lesson is this. The ultimate lesson is transcending judgment and stepping into unconditional love. That is what life is all about, in my opinion. And I don't need a near-death experience to know that. I know that because of what I've experienced here on earth. And it's just confirming that people who are having near-death experiences are confirming that or saying that on the other side when they experience what ultimate reality or what life is really like. beyond Maya. It's what they say in Hinduism. It's a Sanskrit word which means the illusion of separateness. So here we're in this world of duality, of separateness, and it's an illusion, it's Maya. But if we can move past this separateness, what we find is that there is this underlying oneness, this interconnectedness of all life, and quantum physics is revealing that. Quantum physics is showing us that everything is interconnected, everything is one. And that's what it's all about. It's about awakening to that. So we go from judgment, which is separation consciousness, to unconditional love, which is unity consciousness. And we realize that we are all one. And so it's kind of like a two-step process. The first step is experiencing that unconditional love for the first time and really being transformed by that from the inside out. And then step two, and this is the most important, is realizing that you are that unconditional love. And that is another thing people say when they have a near-death experience on the other side. They say that they realize that presence of unconditional love that they had was not something separate from them, but the deepest essence of who they are. We are love itself, and that is what awakening is. We let go of who we think we are, a separate ego, a separate entity, and we realize who we really are, which is divine and one with God and one with everything. And the word for the recognition and the celebration of this union, of the unity of being, oneness, is love. Love is the recognition and the celebration of the awakening, of the realization that everything is one. And again, that happens here. That's happening. People are experiencing that here, especially through meditation or through some kind of transcendent experience. And they're also experiencing it on the other side. So we come here to learn how to transcend judgment, how to wake up to who we really are. And then once that happens, once we wake up to who we really are, then we can start to participate and help in the overall evolution of the collective consciousness of this planet. And that is the process of shifting this planet from the third dimension into the fourth dimension. The fourth dimension is pure unity consciousness, and that is happening right here, right now, as we speak. That shift has started, but as we awaken to that, by awakening to our true self, which can happen here or it can happen through a near-death experience, we then can help in that overall evolution of the planet, and that is amazing. So I think that's it for today. I know I said a lot, and maybe I'll make some more videos on this in the future, but for today, for now, that's all. So if I'll say this, I highly encourage all of you to spend some time looking into some of these near-death experiences, and I would love to hear your thoughts. If you have spent some time and you want to share a little bit about what you've learned, please leave that in the comment section below. I'd love to know what you think about all this. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have a different perspective? And then also, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. So, and also, if you found this video helpful, informative, or insightful, please leave a thumbs up at the bottom of the screen and be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.